everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Gretchen, and today I'm back with another reading recap to catch you up on everything that I have been reading or have finished or might be picking up within the next few weeks. So there are lots of books to talk about. I have obviously been following the Booker Prize and I'm trying to get all of the long list read, but there were only a handful of books that I hadn't already read, so I have had more time dedicated or to dedicate to other books that have been on my TBR for a while. And so August is a fun month for me as well. I love the Booker Prize and that's usually my focus, but I also love to read books in translation, and August is Women in Translation month, so I was able to make sure that I got to a translated book, and I've also been taking the time to get caught up on some of my Booker backlist titles. So these are books that were long listed for previous Booker Prizes over the years that I've been meaning to get to. So there is a lot of books to cover, so let's go ahead and get into them. So the first book that I want to talk about is Miss Ice Sandwich by Mieko Kawakami, and this is translated from the Japanese by Louise Heal Kawai. And this is a short little novella that I picked up for two specific reasons. So first of all, it is my Women in Translation Month pick for August, and then second, it fit a prompt for a reading challenge I'm doing where I was to read a book that had a person's title in the title of the book. So we have Miss Ice Sandwich, so this was perfect for that prompt. And I'm also glad that I picked this up because this was a sweet little book and I really loved this story. So this book follows our main character. He is a young boy and he is absolutely infatuated with this young woman that works at his local supermarket, and he refers to her as Miss Ice Sandwich. And she has these big eyes and she wears this electric blue colored eyeshadow, and he is absolutely mesmerized by her. And she also kind of has like a bit of a standoffish, kind of indifferent demeanor to everything, and he is just absolutely just fascinated with her. And he finds solace in those visits that he takes to the store, and he never talks to her, and he just kind of stares at her, but he does eventually get in line and buy something from her, but that's, you know, the extent of their interactions. So he finds solace in these trips that he takes to the supermarket, and it's helping him deal with all of the pressures and the stress that he's going through at home and at school, you know, trying to make friends. He has a mother that's kind of distant. Although she's physically present, she's kind of off in her own little world, and he has an ill grandmother at home as well. So this is a little kid that's going through a lot, and he just takes comfort in those visits that he makes to the store. And this is a small book and it has a small plot, but it was absolutely full of heart, and I loved that boy so much. He was at the same time naive, but he was super wise for his age too, and I loved that dichotomy, and it captured all of the emotions of being a kid and how we felt the first time that we had our crush at that young age, that first innocent crush. And it was simple and sweet, and I will not lie, I even got a little choked up at the end. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. I've read some of her other books before. I especially liked Heaven, and she also, what was the other book I read of hers? Oh, Breasts and Eggs, and that one was good as well. But yeah, I think she's a solid author, and I was really glad to have picked this one up. So the next book that I ended up picking up was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. And this is my first book by Liz Moore. Shamefully, I have had Long Bright River on my TBR forever, and it's just one of those books that keeps getting pushed to the side, and I don't know why. And now that I have finished The God of the Woods, I definitely want to prioritize that one because I really had a great time with this book. The first thing I'll say is it was a fantastic read for summer. So I know that we are getting close to the end of August, so if you're looking for one last great summer read, this is going to be a perfect one to pick up. It is set in multiple timelines, but the setting is a summer camp, and it's set in the Adirondack Mountains. So for my non-US viewers, that's in the upstate New York area. It's a really popular vacation area, so there's a lot of summer vibes throughout this. Not beachy vibes, but definitely that summer camp vibe. Now, the primary timeline that this book is set in is 1975, and we have a camper that goes missing, and her name is Barbara. And Barbara's disappearance from the camp is all the more disturbing and shocking because Barbara is the daughter of the owners of the land that the camp is on. It's a very wealthy family, the Van Laars. And the family not only owns the camp, but to take it a step further, back in 1961, their son, Bear, also disappeared from the same camp under very similar circumstances. So the story not only focuses on Barbara's disappearance and the investigation into all of that, but we also flash back to 1961 to learn more about Bear's disappearance and what happened to him. And of course, there is a lot of gossipy and juicy bunch of bits to sort through, and I love a good book like that. Now, as with most mysteries, there were lots of characters and suspects, but they all had a solid place in the story too, which I appreciated. Nothing infuriates me more than when an author, when I'm reading a mystery, has like this obscure character that is just mentioned in passing, and then they end up being the culprit. And this author took so much care with each of her characters. There were very few that were just fleeting, and it put all of that out there for us to know about each of the characters, for us to sift through it and figure things out. And I really appreciate when the author doesn't question our intelligence or make it so obscure at the end that we were like, who is that? Because that often happens with mysteries, and it just really irritates me. I also loved that this was, like I said, that 2-for-1 mystery, and I feel like we got closure on both stories. All of my questions were answered, which is exactly what I want from a mystery. I had such a good time with this book. I don't read mystery thrillers too often because I usually find them to be really predictable and sometimes, I hate to say this, but poorly written. And that usually grates on me as well, but this one kept me on my toes, and it had a lot of components that I wasn't expecting, and it was also written well, which really surprised me for the genre. And the last thing I'll say is if you've been sitting on this book and have kind of been afraid to jump into it because it's thick. This is almost a 500-page book, but don't let that deter you. It read like a 300-page book. It was really super fast-paced, and because it was so fascinating, I struggled to put it down. So my time just flew by with this book, and I will definitely be picking up more from Liz Moore in the future, and I'm also looking forward to going back into her backlist as well. So now all of the books moving forward are those Booker backlist ones. So the first one that I want to talk about is The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner. Now this was a Booker backlist book from 2018 when it was shortlisted, and I have never read anything by Rachel Kushner, but she's also longlisted this year for Creation Lake, and because I have never read anything from her, I thought thought, while I'm waiting for Creation Lake to be released, this is the next best thing that I can read to get me prepared for her style of writing. So this book starts in 2003, and it follows our main character, Romy, and it begins with her starting her prison sentence in a California women's prison for 2 life sentences. And this book switches back and forth between the first person narration from Romy, but also we get third person POV from some of the other inmates or other people that were a part of Romy's life throughout this book as well. So it's not committing to one perspective. The book really focuses on the life that she had inside the prison, but we also learn a lot about her life outside leading up to her arrest and the time she spent working in a strip club, which is called the Mars Room. And we also learn about her young son named Jackson. So throughout the book, we meet a whole array of interesting characters, and we learn a bit about their stories as well. So we get a lot of information on the inmates that are around her and even some of the workers within the prison. Now, I did find this book interesting, but to be fair, I've always kind of found books and movies about prison intriguing. I worked as a corrections nurse for a few years, and believe me when I tell you that that was one of the craziest jobs that I've ever had. Never a dull moment, and each day that I went in was more interesting than the previous days that I had been there. So I've seen a lot, and I hate to say it, but I don't feel like this novel really did anything new or cutting edge that hasn't already been provided in some of our other works of, you know, books about prison or movies. I think that it was just kind of mid, unfortunately. And I think that part of it was that I found some of the things that were happening in here to be a little unbelievable, and I'm not saying that the things that happened weren't possible within the walls of the prison. It was just too convenient that this particular prisoner was witness or a part of all of those things that were happen. It almost felt to me like as Kushner was kind of doing her research on what it's like to be in prison, she made a list of all of the crazy crap that actually can happen, and she tried to shoehorn every single one of those things into this book for that one character to experience, and it just didn't feel very realistic for me. And although I did appreciate her plight as a character, I just never felt myself really connecting to her as the reader. And this was really surprising to me, especially since once we learned about her crime and we as a reader could make a conclusion as to whether she should have even been perceived as a criminal or not. So I felt because we had, you know, that opportunity to empathize with her for what actually happened, and I still couldn't connect with her as a character, it just was a little disappointing for me, and sadly this book kind of fell flat for that reason. However, I enjoyed Kushner's writing style, but it felt a little restrained to me, and I felt like there may have been more that she wanted to say, but was too afraid to do it. So if that is the case, I'm hoping that my next experience with reading from her, which will be Creation Lake, I think it's released, I want to say September 5th maybe. I'm hoping that when that book comes out, I can connect a little better with her characters, because I do think that she's a writer that I could get along with, but sadly, I just wasn't able to connect to the characters in this book enough to love it. It was just a middle of the range book for me, but I'm glad I read it, and it's another book or backlist that I can check off my list. So there's kind of a bit of a pattern with the next book that I chose to read for my Booker backlist, and that is Bewilderment by Richard Powers. And the reason that I picked this one up is just the same reason why I picked up The Mars Room. So Richard Powers is longlisted this year for Playground, and I have yet to read anything by Richard Powers. So I was looking at one of his Booker backlists to pick up, and I'm kind of spoiled for choice when it comes to Richard Powers because this year will be the 4th time that he has been nominated for the Booker Prize. He was longlisted back in 2014 for Orfeo, and he was shortlisted in 2018 for The Overstory, and then we had 2020, which was when he was shortlisted for Bewilderment. So out of all of them that were longlisted, or shortlisted I should say, I chose Bewilderment just because it is the shortest of all of them, and I also had a copy laying around just waiting to be read. So this world is set in the near future, and it is set during a time of climate crisis. And not only is the US going through a climate crisis as well as the rest of the world, but there's also a lot of turmoil politically in the US as well, and that's kind of like a backdrop for the story. It follows our main character. His name is Theo, and Theo is an astrobiologist. He is a single parent to his son, Robin. His wife passed away in an accident, and he's been alone with Robin for a while. Now, Robin is 9 years old, and very close to the beginning of the book, we learn that Robin has been diagnosed with Asperger's, ADHD, and also OCD. Theo wants to avoid putting him on medication, and he agrees to have Robin participate in this alternative type of neurofeedback therapy that is actually involving previous recordings taken from his mother's brain. And really the rest of the book kind of focuses on that therapy and the outcomes that Robin has. Once again, like I said, while all of the backdrop of, you know, the climate crisis and the political situation are going on in the background. And I will start by saying that I did enjoy this book, because as I start to talk about it, it's probably going to sound like I didn't, but I did. I had a good time with this book and I did enjoy it, but going into it, I didn't realize that this was basically going to be a Flowers for Algernon retelling with a sprinkle of climate fiction in there. And I honestly felt kind of cheated, and I could see exactly where this story was heading from very early on. Now, I am not at all opposed to a retelling. One of my favorite books this year is a retelling, but it was very upfront about what it was doing, what its inspiration was, and that it was a retelling of another book or another story, or it took that inspiration from it. With this one, I felt like I was promised a unique story, and although when I read the synopsis, I immediately thought of Flowers for Algernon, but that's because that's a book that I love and that I've read it several times, and I was able to pick up on the similarities. But if I hadn't been familiar with that book, I would have had no idea that this book was purposely doing a lot of the same things and a lot of the same themes. And like I said, it made me feel a little cheated, and that this was trying to stand apart and being considered something unique and groundbreaking, when in reality it isn't. It was already done before. Powers even went as far in this book as having two characters have a conversation and dialogue about that specific book. So it was just a little too much for me And like I said, because I didn't know that going in, I just felt a little cheated. But the funny thing about all of it is, if I had known by reading the synopsis when I first picked up this book years ago and potentially was going to add it to my TBR, that this was going to be inspired by, or it was a loose retelling of Flowers for Algernon, I would have picked this book up a lot sooner. And I would have went into this book looking at it in a completely different light. But as I started to get into it, I just felt ripped off, and like I was reading a ripoff. And I know that that probably wasn't Power's intent, but because I didn't know that going in, I really did feel like he was trying to pull a fast one on us and be like, yeah, I have this new original story that's never been told before. And if a reader hadn't been aware of the story, then they could have walked away from this book thinking that this was something that was completely brand new and had never happened before. And I just felt a little put off by that. Now, I will say that what this book did bring that Algernon didn't was that angle of climate science, which is kind of what actually ended up saving this book for me in the end. I absolutely loved how passionate Robin was about the environment, and that he tried so hard to get everybody around him to do the same. I loved all of the time that was spent in nature, the animals we learned about, especially birds. Also, a lot of this book takes place in the Smoky Mountains, and I love the Smoky Mountains. If you have ever considered traveling to that area and being out in those woods, I highly recommend it. Those woods are a magical place, and because I have experienced them myself, that definitely made me connect more to this book than I would say a reader that maybe hadn't been in that area. I also really liked the father-son dynamic between Theo and Robin. The love that Theo had for Robin was fierce, and I loved how Powers touched on the fact that we can truly love someone without fully understanding them, and also the lengths that Theo would go to make his life easier. Even though some of them were questionable, it was still a great dynamic to see how far we would truly go to make the lives of our loved ones easier if we could. So the bottom line is that even though I didn't hate this book by any means, I thought the writing was lovely, and I think he had a lot of very important things to say, and the story was touching, and I did even tear up at the end. It just didn't fully meet my expectations. I went into it expecting something different, and I got something very familiar, and I was just a little put off by that. But once again, that's a Gretchen thing. That's not a book thing, and I'm definitely going to give him a chance again. I'll for sure be reading Orfeo and the Overstory and his new one, Playground. I don't think that comes out until toward the end of September after they announce the shortlist, so that'll be the next one of his that I get to very soon. The next book that I picked up is Redhead by the Side of the Road by Anne Tyler. This is my first Anne Tyler, and it is one of two books that she was longlisted for the Booker Prize. She was actually, I lied, she was shortlisted in 2015 for a book called A Spool of Blue Thread, and she was longlisted for this one back in 2020. This book follows our main character, Micah, and Micah is this guy in his early 40s, and he's described as a creature of habit, and he's very set in his routines, and he doesn't stray from them and lives kind of a pretty mundane and predictable life. And he does have a girlfriend. He is 40 and she's in like her mid-30s, but he has no plans of committing to her. And one day he hears from her that she is going to be evicted from her apartment and she's not going to have a place to live. very shortly after he gets that news, he gets a knock on his door, and it is a teenage boy that is claiming that Micah is his father. So once he gets this news, his life is kind of completely upended, and all of his routines are disrupted, and he's kind of now forced to make some decisions about his life and what his life is going to look like moving forward. And I don't think that this book was anything spectacular by any means, but it was a really enjoyable read for me. It's just under 200 pages. I read it on a Saturday afternoon. It was a quick read because it was a good, engaging story. I got through it very quickly, and I love a good second chance story, especially when the characters are likable from the very beginning. We have those stories where you have those really moody and grouchy characters that turn their lives around and they end up coming out on the other side more likable, but I especially like when the good guys get a better outcome as well. And although Micah had his flaws, he was a relatively good person to begin with, and he just needed to open up his heart a little in order for him to find that bigger purpose in his life. And this was a pretty low stakes read, but it was heartwarming, and it showed a lot of humanity and was kind of just that good reminder to periodically check in with yourself and make sure that you're happy with the path that you're on and that you're not getting in your own way. And overall, I found that Tyler's writing was very accessible. There's something I found very kind of cozy and comforting about the way that she writes. It was almost like a conversation that you would have between two friends catching up on, you know, what their son is up to or what their family is getting into and all of that kind of stuff. It just felt very homey and familiar, and I will definitely be picking up a spool of Blue Thread as well because it was a Booker book, but she has a really extensive backlist. I think I read that she has like 24 books in her backlist, so she has a lot of books to read, and I'm not really sure where else to start aside from a spool of Blue Thread. I've heard good things about, I think it's something like Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant or something like that. I've heard really good things about that one, but she has so many other ones. I'm curious if any of you that have read Ann Tyler know of any other books of hers that stand out as ones you think that I might enjoy as well. I'd love to hear that in the comments. And the last book that I picked up and finished was Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. This book was shortlisted back in 2016, and it's actually the second Moshfegh that I have finished. I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation a year or so ago, and I really enjoyed my time with that book. It was weird and it was bonkers, and I absolutely hated the main character. I thought she was vile, and I enjoyed my time with that, and I was kind of hoping to get the same type of experience out of this one. And although the vibe is a little different with this, there was a lot of that overlapping kind of feelings that I got with an unlikable character and such, and I did really end up enjoying my time with this book. So this book follows our main character, Eileen. She's a young woman and she lives with her alcoholic father, and she has a job as a secretary in this prison for boys. Her life is pretty uneventful, but she definitely dreams of bigger things, but kind of feels trapped because her father is so dependent on her, and she doesn't really think that she's ever going to be able to escape her life. And she's also very unlikable, or I found her to be unlikable, which may be a pattern with Moshfegh's main characters. But regardless, she's always kind of doing these weird little things, and she lies and she steals, and definitely a bit of an outsider, and she does a lot of like physically gross things as well, which was odd. But one day at work, the prison gets a new counselor, and it's this woman named Rebecca, and Eileen is immediately drawn to her. Rebecca is smart and beautiful and really charismatic and independent, and when Rebecca shows an interest in stirring up this friendship with Eileen, she definitely goes along with it, and then something really big happens that completely changes the course of Eileen's life. And I am certainly not going to give that away, but what I will say is, if you have not read this book and you're thinking of it, don't read the back of the book, because there is a little bit of a giveaway in there, and it's not a complete spoiler by any means, but I wish that I didn't see things like this on the back of covers, because I went into this book completely blank. Like, I didn't know anything about it. I knew it was a Booker book, so I was going to read it regardless. And after I finished it, I did read the back, and I thought, wow, like, I'm so glad I didn't know that going into this book, because it was such a shock for me when that happened, because I was not expecting anything like that at all. And the book was kind of slow paced at the very beginning, and we kept on getting toward the end, and the character kept alluding to an event and that something was going to happen. But as we started to get further along into the book, I kept thinking, wow, we're getting pretty close to the end, and nothing that I would consider really major or big has happened. But maybe, you know, Eileen does live a pretty boring life. Maybe this thing that happened, which I thought to be minor, was actually the big thing. So I was enjoying the writing though, and I was having an all right time. And then we got to the event, and then I was immediately obsessed with this book. From that moment on, I devoured the rest of it, and it definitely finished on a high note for me. However, although the book did end on a high note for me, I wish that we would have got to the good stuff a little sooner. Like I said, it was pretty slow paced, and although I was really enjoying the writing and the tone, it was kind of grim and moody. I was kind of wondering, like, when are we going to get to the meat of this story? And I wish that maybe there were a couple more bigger, more exciting things to happen along the way leading up to that huge reveal that happened toward the end. But I would, and I say that because I was really enjoying the book, but I could see a reader not getting along with it and maybe getting frustrated with it, that nothing like of interest was really happening, and giving up on the book before the book got fantastic. So I just wish that there would have been a little more action on the front end to kind of build up, just in case there would be a reader that, you know, needed a little more encouragement to keep going, because I would hate to see somebody miss out on the ending of this book. So after I did read this book though, I think that Moshfegh is an acquired taste, and this isn't going to be a book every reader gels with. So proceed with caution. I have had luck with 2 of her books so far, but I also love unlikable characters and people that are super flawed, and I also don't mind weird and uncomfortable stories. So I think that's probably why I gel with her books, and if you're the type of reader that likes those same things, I think that this could be an author that you could really enjoy. So yeah, I will definitely be picking up her other backlist books. Like I said, I've read 2. I think she has maybe another novel and maybe a couple short story collections, and of course anything that ever comes out from her in the future. I think the next book that I'll pick up from her will be Lapvona. I bought that one last year and I didn't have a chance to get around it, but I'm thinking that that book kind of, it gives me kind of like fall and autumn, maybe spooky vibes, so maybe I'll pick that up this autumn. So yeah, I enjoyed my time with this, and I'm looking forward to hearing if anybody else out there enjoyed this book as much as I did. So those are all the books that I have finished, and just a couple things to say about what to expect in my next recaps. I am almost done with Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. I am currently reading Annie Bot by Sierra Greer. I am also reading another Women in Translation book. We have Kibogo by Scholastique Mukasonga, and this is translated from the French by Mark Polizzotti. And I am also still continuing with the Booker long list, and my current read, which I'm about halfway through, is Stone Yard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. So there's still reading to be done for the Booker long list, and I love that I don't have as many books to read because I am able to sprinkle all of these other books in the midst, and I'm still having a great reading time. My streak is still alive with me enjoying all of my books that I'm reading for the most part. And yeah, I hope you guys are all reading a great book, and until we read again, bye.